Excellent. It's so great to have you here. And again, thank you on behalf of UCLA Anderson for agreeing to join us. It's an incredible privilege and a delight to get to speak with you. Even though we have such a compressed amount of time, I know you have just such a wealth of insight to share from your time at Nick Latin America and all the years that you've spent since so successfully coaching other general managers and executives. It's great to be able to at least get the tip of that iceberg with you. So thanks again.
Yep, happy to be here. And thanks for that nice intro.
I would love if you could start us off by setting the sort of stage of general management for us, because your case has become one of the most popular cases that HBS has ever published. It's a classic in general management to really sort of define some of the core skills and values that allow a person to be successful in that role. And I'd love if you could just sort of set the stage by telling us about your perspective on general management, what that job is, and how a person would tell if it's a good fit.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so partly what Heather's referring to is that I do a lot of coaching, advising, mentoring of MBA students, and I often hear them say, I want to be the CEO, I want to run something, and I always say, well, do you know what that means? And I find out that most of the time they don't, because it's a great title, it sounds good, you're in charge. But what I always say is, like, let's kind of walk through what it means. And the first thing I start with is that it's a heavy people job. You're in the people business. And what I've found over the years is that very, very talented people functionally, so I would say business development, marketers, they're very good at what they do, but they don't necessarily realize that when you become the head or the general manager or CEO, that you're going to be spending most of your time talking to people. And a lot of people I found don't really like doing that. And so I was at this change management seminar, and they asked us in the audience, what percentage of the time should you be spending with your team or people? And they had like 15%, 30, 50, 75, whatever, 85. Anyway, the answer was 85%, and people were picking like 15 or 30. And I think that says it all. So that's not all you do, but I think that going into this type of role, you have to really, literally love people. That's my view, that you really have to enjoy working with people, collaborating, spending time. I mean, when people say, and I've had this said to me in my coaching, that I know I need to spend more time with my people, but I don't have time. It takes so much energy to develop people, and they say that, and they're serious. But that's what this job is all about. It's not about you coming in and saying, this is the plan, this is what we do, go execute, and I'll talk to you, next year. This is a very intensive people job. It's having a good eye for what kind of people to select, what types of people you need, how do you clarify their roles, how do you get them to work together as a team. So there's a lot of finessing, a lot of just appealing to people's better sense of self, and just, it's heavy people, but that's what I love. So for me, it was the perfect fit. And as an executive coach and organizational development consultant, I get to continue heavily working with people. But I just like to always, I told Heather, I'd really want to say that, because I think it doesn't get talked about much, how much this is about spending time with people. And if that's not appealing, doesn't mean you can't have a great career. It's just, you might not want to be the head of something, because it would be a permanent headache, basically.
I think that clarification is incredibly important, especially for our MBAs who are here really trying to figure out what are the right fits and what does appeal to me. And it's interesting that you mentioned sort of, you need to love being with people, you need to think about the different kinds of time that you're going to spend with people, but it's going to be a lot of time doing a lot of different things. I can imagine some of our students like being with people, maybe love being with people, but don't necessarily have the intuitions that you have had, the ones that were so on display in the Nick Latin America case, for exactly what to do, how to sort of strategically, how do you channel your enjoyment of people into effective team management? And so much of what comes out in the Nick Latin America case is your expert, although very sort of intuitive. One doesn't get the feeling that you were being coached by someone else the entire time, but really it was quite intuitive. So I guess the next question I'd want to ask you to respond to is this question of, how does one who doesn't have those intuitions lead an effective team? What are your sort of key strategies you would point people towards to develop?
Yeah. So I think when you start to manage, you know, a big group of people. But I think it can start when you're managing one person, quite frankly. Just think about like what's important to you. I think each person has to own their own view of what managing a team is. So what's important to you in your team? How do they behave? How do they treat each other? How do they, you know, how do you make decisions together? You know, how do you, you know, so are you evidence-based, or are you sort of just, you know, intuition or gut feel? And how, you know, be very deliberate about how you think you want your team to work together. And I think that's something you can do on your own and figure out what's important to you. Now, I did at one point in my career, after I got not the best performance review, it was a very odd situation where I had a boss for a few months, and she was saying, well, I don't know. She had a lot of questions about me. And when I asked for, well, give me some examples, she couldn't give me any. So I think she really just didn't understand me and what I did, and didn't give me very good. So I read, you know, tons and tons of management books, Peter Drucker, who's like not alive anymore, but one of the legends, and just read it, Warren Bennis, and read their books and thought about it myself. And again, this wasn't, I didn't have, I had one person working for me. I was, you know, director of business, international business development, Nickelodeon. But I had this interest in like, how can I be a great leader? And so I think a lot of it is reading, and then thinking yourself, and people that you do look up to already. Who do you, you know, did you look up to Steve Jobs? Did you look up to, I don't know, it's a good leader off the top of my head. Kamala Harris, I don't know. You know, who do you look up to, and sort of maybe draw from them people that were inspirational, good bosses you had. And like, what can you steal from your good boss? What did they do? Or what did people do that you didn't like? And you're going to do the opposite. So I think it's, you know, I do think that everybody does have a point of view. They just have to be deliberate about thinking about it. And you know, hopefully if you're the right kind of boss, you get feedback from your team. I highly recommend that you sort of say, what could I be doing better? What am I, you can do that individually. You can do that with your team. And just ask them, like, what could I be doing more of? What should I be doing less of? And make sure you're getting that 360 feedback to help you, you know, hone your skills.
Oh, I love those points. It feels like clarity is a really important piece. It's interesting, so many people, I think especially while they're in school, can default to the impression that leadership is about a specific set of to-dos, like there are particular tactics that you need to implement. And what you're highlighting is that sometimes there might be a very wide range of tactics that work. What's important is to develop some clarity in terms of which tactics appeal to you, which ones you're going to be able to implement, and then maybe use that feedback you alluded to refine your preferences and your tactics over time. Is that capturing it?
Yes, I think I'm so glad you raised that word clarity, because I hadn't thought to say that, but that's exactly right. It's, you know, I think people are looking for clarity from their leaders, and it's often missing. And it's a small thing in a way to say, I'm just going to be clear, but it just doesn't happen that much. And part of it is getting clear in your own head, and sort of having the backbone to stick with your clarity and what you believe in, and not worry about what other people are thinking. And I think that's what gets in the way a lot of times, is you're trying to please people, and whether it's your boss, your peers, and as opposed to like, what do you think is right? But not in a autocratic way, but just having a belief system that people, because a lot of people just want to know, like, what do you want? You know, what am I supposed to be doing? They don't necessarily, they don't like necessarily the free for all, you can do whatever you want type of boss. I think they're looking for that clarity.
I think that's exactly right. It's interesting, that also picks up on something that was mentioned by a number of our students, just in terms of managing the space you give to your vision and your preferences and your way of being, and then the kind of individual preferences of your team, thinking about how do you motivate people individually with some, or, you know, to what extent do you manage them individually with reference to their own particular preferences and needs for feedback, versus managing the team as a collective entity. Did you think about that as you were leading?
Well, as I was saying to you, the pre-calls we did, I was just doing everything for the first time in this case. You know, I had subsequent management jobs, but I did a blend. I think whatever the case necessitated. You know, I think you can never look at management as it's always this way. It's like, you know, it's what do you need to do for that specific situation? It's always looking at them clean and from the start, and how do you behave? But again, I think it's critical that you have great one-on-one relationships with your team members, that you know them well, that you have a clear plan for them, which I've gotten feedback over the years that what people that worked for me have called me up and said, that's what I miss most about you not being my boss, is that no one's looking after my career. And again, these things, when I'd hear them, I'd say, oh, I thought every boss did that. Like I just didn't know. I was just doing what I thought was right. Was every person that works for me, they need to be someone that I care. I mean, honestly, I cared much more about their careers than mine, quite frankly. I really my job was to, manage a business for the company. That's my first objective. I have to make it successful. And then how do I do that? I bring in great people. I give them clear roles. I manage them well as a team. I get to know them and help them grow, like this whole formula that I had. So, going back to the individual, I was very much determined to know where they wanted to go. I mean, I even got into that in the interviews when I was interviewing them for the job. It wasn't even once they joined, because I want to know, like, am I going to be able to not just make this person happy, but help them grow the way they want to. So I feel it's a big responsibility for me to hire someone that I'm bringing you in and you're trusting me to look after your career. Now, of course, you have to look after your own career. And I tell people that when I'm coaching them, my boss isn't doing that. I'm like, well, that would be great if your boss did do it, but you better do it for yourself then. Like you absolutely need to do your part. But as I think the supervisor, the boss should be absolutely looking after the careers. And then now moving more over to the team side, I definitely very early in managing teams was very clear about we will work together well, we will respect each other, we will listen to each other, we will challenge each other, we will all be thinking about the company we work for, and that's our objective, not our individual stars. It's about us as a team delivering for the ultimate business. And that was always clear. As much as I was a people person, I was always, we have to meet our numbers. We are paid by Viacom to do our jobs. And it's not about like wanting a bigger office space or, whatever, we have to deliver. So I always sent that message that we have this higher purpose of first and foremost meeting the company's goals, and then our customers or whoever we're working for, we need to look beyond ourselves, even our team, beyond our team. So I was very clear, like if I saw any type of bad behavior, it was immediately addressed. And not necessarily in front of the whole group, but if needed to be, it would be in front of the whole group. But I did a lot of, that's where the one-on-one comes back, where, someone's sort of doing something that's not appropriate. I would immediately, get that person on my schedule. And one of the things that I always like to talk about that I didn't bring up is that, please, when you go out to manage, do not have meetings from 8 to 7 p.m. every day. So in my coaching practice, the biggest issue that I see are that managers are too occupied by meetings to really be effective managers. So I tell them at a minimum, you should have a 2 to 3 hour block per day that is completely open, unscheduled, because your team needs you. Your team, if they have something that comes up, it's a big sale they're working on, they're having trouble, you need to be available. That's what you're there for. Remember the 85% of the time with your team earlier. But what I find is managers justify that, oh, if I'm not there, the meeting, something will go wrong, or, no one else will be able to do this as well as I could. And I'm like, I just say to them, you got to figure it out. You got to figure out how to be available. I mean, I think that's probably one of the biggest things you can do as a boss, is just be available to your team.
I think those are really wonderful insights, especially these days when there's so much sort of chaos and uncertainty in the world. That kind of, again, it's to the clarity point, and to a sort of clarity about priorities, like know what really matters. And for you, it sounds like, making sure that everyone understands what the team is accountable for, that really matters. And also the individuals, and making sure that we're paying attention to what they want out of this work, out of sort of their careers. And if we kind of keep those things at the forefront, then you sort of you can go with the flow and never be too far off of what you're trying to do. Thank you for that. I'm hoping we can dig into this uncertainty and the kind of chaos that's surrounding all of us now with the pandemic, and just ask you to think through how you would guide people, how you would ask or advise people to manage and motivate people when that kind of uncertainty and anxiety is especially high. Are there, I mean, with Nick Latin America, we know you didn't have the models, the market data that you wanted, that would ideally provide you with the guidelines for what kinds of choices to make. What can you take from that experience to guide people today?
Well, I mean, to the part about the data and the uncertainty, including the uncertainty that the business that we were trying to launch could be closed before it even launched, was just saying to people, like, we just need to keep pressing ahead and do our best every day. That's all we can do. As far as and being always, again, that being available, being there when they need me, when things are tough. I think in this current situation we're in, I think from what I've seen from some of the companies we're working with is that there's much more communication is required because people are uncertain and scared and sad and all these different emotions, that actually having more time together as a team or one-on-one is actually helpful. Because I think initially people felt, well, it's remote. We're barely going to talk to each other. So no, actually, you need to talk more because you don't bump into each other when you're microwaving your lunch or getting water or something. So you need to actually be much more deliberate about your meetings. Now, I didn't get into that, but it is absolutely critical that as a manager that you have your weekly meeting with your team and that you keep them. Right? So individual team members and with your team separately, those meetings. So I think if I would hope that a lot of people were already doing these things before the pandemic hit so that you stay in that flow, maybe you add to it. But for people who weren't, then you absolutely need to do these things. You need to have this communication. You need to be available, as I said. And I think the uncertainty, I mean, I think you can, I think you have to be comfortable with risk in business. There are no right answers, and realize that if you do start to go down the wrong path, you can always pivot. I mean, that's the one thing I tell people, like in business school, the case studies we did, there's no real right answer. You can't even prove that it was the right answer most of the time, because how do you know if you'd gone another path, what would have happened? So I think you have to be comfortable with, you've done your research, you've strategized, you've consulted the right people, go forward and don't look back. And then if it's not working, you can adjust. And so don't get paralyzed by not moving. I worked for a perfectionist boss once, the worst experience of my life, because there is no perfect answer. You just have to keep moving, but you have to have an informed direction that you're taking. So I think if you have a boss that says, look, if we end up failing, we do, like it's not the end of the world and people aren't going to get fired. And if you make it a comfortable and safe space for people to experiment and just do things. And I think that can work well. And that's what you have to be able to do, is create an environment where there are no easy answers. We might have to pivot. Let's do our best as we go.
Yeah, that brings up another really interesting point about your case, which is that you were really comfortable, or it seems like you were very comfortable with something a lot of people find uncomfortable, which is trying to create this sort of whole new channel in a place, in a culture that was, at least initially, unfamiliar. And so I wonder if you could talk about how you went about gaining the informed perspective that allowed you to do that. How would you adequately adapt to that culture while maintaining some loyalty to and a real kind of dedication to preserving the significance of the brand itself?
Yeah. So the case, I don't think gets into it that much, but everywhere we go or went, especially in Northern Europe, it's very challenging because people's view on what kids programming is very different in a Northern Europe where there are no commercials. So that's a big revenue stream. So that's challenge number one. But also that programming should be educational. And so one of the first things I did when I took on this director of international business development role is we looked around the country at, I mean, the world, and we looked at the programming that existed. We read up on, and we, you know, we would call people locally that we would get connected to and see, like, what are the types of programs that kids, parents want for their kids, because really the parents are sort of controlling that for Nickelodeon's age. And we could also see what's on the air. And so we intentionally didn't even try to go to markets where Nickelodeon wouldn't be embraced. And in fact, the reason after we launched in Europe, in what was England first and then Germany, the reason that I pushed really hard for Latin America is, one, because we were already late. And I said, you know, we won't even be able to get in if we keep waiting. But also I knew the culture was simpatico with it was, you know, South America and North America, much closer in terms of what you want for your kids. Now, that said, in Latin America, they're okay with a commercial with a woman wearing a bra, for example. You know, skin is okay. So, or feminine products or things that here we'd be like, oh my God, you know, kids can't see that. So we did have to, those were some of the challenges, was, you know, working with, they call it the standards department, like, you know, what kind of commercials are, so if we sell advertising in Argentina that has those types of, you know, images, our people in New York are going to say, no, that can't, you know, you can't run that. So you do have to, you have to, it's a balance. Like, you have to, you know, there are certain things that we wouldn't be willing to do that we won't do, even if they're good for us revenue wise, but you also have to appeal to your local audience. So one of the things also I don't think the case talks much about is that the launch team were usually the New York based people or London based people, you know, all hardly ever knew the language, you know, but we brought in, everywhere we brought in was either from the region or, you know, so in Latin America it's hard because there's 20 countries, but we had people from all over, you know, South America and Central America. And those people take over and they make it their own. Like, they make it, you know, we ourselves have limitations on how much we could customize with our team. And with Latin America, I think the case does cover that we went around the region doing shoots with kids from all over, because we wanted to kind of show this, you know, we can't be a channel for Mexico, one for, you know, Colombia, and we can't do that, but what we can do is feature kids from all over, and including the programming, if there was local programming we could buy. So that's a whole exercise to figure out how to take our brand. But we did a lot of focus groups. Like I said, we would talk to a lot of kids, and we came up with our tagline based on just testing a bunch of taglines with kids. And so Nickelodeon is legendary for how much research they do with kids.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously I think it was incredibly successful and allowed you to make really wise investments of time and pivot where you needed to. It's, I think, especially striking to me reading the case, something we talk about at Anderson a lot here is the importance of hearing other people, seeing other people the way that they want to be heard, the way that they want to be seen. And there was so much at Nick Latin America of both telling people or sort of showing people, here's who we are. And, you know, I really enjoyed reading about the kind of grow down events that you hosted, but then also making such an effort to try to find out what the audience would like, what the kids wanted, what the parents wanted, and how they would want to be represented as parts of the channel. So that was
a shout out to Nickelodeon, I will say, because I worked at Disney and Cartoon Network, and I'm not bashing them. I had a good time at all three places, but Nickelodeon literally that is part of their philosophy. That is why they're so strong, because they actually have like focus group studios in their offices, so that kids can come every week. Like, it's not let's go, we're about to launch a new show, let's go talk to a few kids. This is just, they have an online panel. They had an online panel before people used the word online, you know, way back in the, I don't know, early 90s they had. So they have always made that part. And that's what I really liked about working there, is that it was deep. You know, they really wanted to understand kids. And they actually would say in our programming meetings, they would say, we would never talk to a kid that way, you know. But I never heard that at the other competing kids networks. Again, I'm not bashing them, just factually, that's not what they would say. They would say, we know what kids like. And we would say, actually, we want to respect kids and talk to them in a way where we're not looking down to them. And they have all these promises of how they should speak to kids, but that we need to talk to them all the time because we really don't know how to program to them. We need to hear from them. So
Oh, wow.
it was really a fun place to work.
Yeah.
Eugene, just jumping in to highlight that that is a theme that our students will be hearing over and over again in lots of our classes, is that many of us work in the sort of field of judgment and decision making, where a common theme is that people trust their sort of intuition about people who are different from them much more than they should. And so rather than guess at what a 6-year-old might like, why not ask them directly? And I think that was kind of an incredible innovation that, that Nickelodeon was really at the forefront of.
Yes.
And Heather, this is my friendly reminder that we probably have time for one more detailed question, or 2 smaller questions if you want to pick your next favorite.
Sure, thank you. I know, I mean, this is always going to be a painful moment because you're so fun to talk to, Taran, and I know that there's a lot more that you could do to enlighten us about what happened in the case. But what I will do is sort of zoom
in. 2 hours next time. Then.
I'm sorry?
Make it 2 hours next time, and then we can.
I know, right? Good note. What I want to do then is zoom out to talk about your leadership style, which is so much the kind of the theme that runs throughout the case. And you know, in the case, it's clear, incredibly successful, and then it sort of catapulted you or propelled you onto a very successful career afterwards as well. I think the students were curious as to whether or not it ever didn't work. Were there ever any projects or teams where it didn't connect?
Yeah, so I would say that I don't think my style didn't work. It's more how much I was able to build my team or my business from scratch or not. So the perfect example is right after I ran Nickelodeon Latin America and I had my baby, and I decided I didn't want to do international anymore. I said, I am not traveling all over the globe anymore. I want to be with my kid. And, so I took a quote domestic job by taking on Nickelodeon's digital area. So I ran digital for Nickelodeon for 3 years. So in that case, I came in for someone that was failing. So there was already somebody running it, and he was failing. And we started to, I was computer science and engineering undergrad and master's and Bell Laboratory. So I was like, hey, this is me coming back to my roots with the technology side. And so when I come in, I inherited about 200 or so people. And it's not that my style didn't work as much, it's just that I had all these people that I would never have hired. No offense, but and there was a dynamic in the team that was already slightly toxic, and people weren't happy. And it just, in those 3 years that I ran it, I moved it as much as I could. I had to lay off 160 people. To get it down. Basic story was when I came in and I said there were 200 people, there was almost no real revenue. And I said, why do we have all these people? What are people doing? And as I started digging into it, I saw that no one was really minding the store, and they just were doing all these things they shouldn't, and they weren't strategic, and they, just lots of ill-conceived strategies. Let me just say that. And so I had to look at it. And so I had to shut down a business. That's why there were so many people. That was part of the reason the head count came down. So it also wasn't fun like Nickelodeon Latin America. We were growing something. It was starting from scratch. Everybody had ownership. They came in together. We were happy. This was, oh, there's going to be another layoff, or, and I don't think people didn't dislike me. I think I still feel like a lot of people, respected me, and things were, I was moving the things forward, and I think things were going well. But I learned after that I much prefer to be part of crafting the beginning of a business, because once you come in of something that's not really, it's like a turnaround basically. And I realized, I don't know that I really like turnarounds as much. I mean, I can do it. And, we became profitable within a couple of years, brought it to the right size business. Lots of great stuff happened, but it just wasn't the joy that I had. So I don't know I don't think that was about my style as much. So I think the other thing I think I've learned is that my style is not, I like to be sort of, this is your role, this is your job. And I find that sometimes if it's not clear and like I'm in a partnership now where, I have a co-managing partner who I like a lot, but I find that it's harder for me to be in that position where I'm not, because I don't necessarily agree on her leadership style per se, or we have very different leadership styles. So I find that difficult to sort of share the leadership role. So that says something to me about my style, that like, I'm not, I don't know if Donna is on the call, but I'm not an autocrat, but I think I do have a very clear way that I like to lead. So it's hard for me to co-lead with others.
Yeah, and in many ways, that really brings us back to the first point that you made about the importance of understanding the fit between the role and your preferences, the way you want to lead, not just making sure that you want to be doing general management, but that you want to be doing general management in this particular situation. Turnaround.
Really, yeah. So therefore, when people are looking for their jobs, one of the things I tell, so at the level of your students, you really need to ask good questions in your interviews, and figure out a lot about the culture. Are the people you interview that are interviewing you, are they complaining a lot? Are they a little bit negative? Are they, find out where does, what they're doing, does it lead to, is there a pathway upwards? All those really good questions so you can figure out, because a lot of people say, oh, it's Google or it's Facebook or it's whatever the, tech company of the day. But you've got to figure out, is it the right thing for you though? Is it really a good opportunity? And I often say that I would rather work for a small or mid-sized company, but I can get my hands dirty. I can really do something meaningful than go say, oh, I'm at Facebook, but I don't like my job. I'm not, and sometimes depending on where you are, where your career profile is, you may need a name. Like sometimes you just need a name. Like Disney for me was the name on my resume. Before that it was Salomon Brothers on Wall Street, which doesn't even exist anymore, but it's part of Citi. But, sometimes you do need a name to validate you, and that's okay, but just don't get stuck there if you're doing it for that reason.
A great point. One can easily see why you're why you were a great general manager and why you're a successful executive coach.